Hi, I'll continue from the last video, from the chapter on the brace, in Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. And so your roll of honor don't have a clue that what they are saying is old. So, and I'll soon be reading a paragraph from Bach to connect with this. It'll show exactly, Bach will be talking about these roll of honor people. But first I want to mention some recognizable or relatable characteristics of the fingering taught and practiced in the cage. So, I was in the cage, I was in Lilliput, and what I'm saying here is these are things that were part of my life with regard to fingering in the cage. And I went through the system. I am no different. I might be ignored or, seen as some sort of an outcast or whatever. But I went through the same system that you're going through if you're studying music. So I know what it's like. And I wasn't the only one studying music at the time. So I had friends, people I knew studying music, piano at the same time. And when you're spending time, when you're talking to other people studying piano, you get to hear what they're going through, what they're up to, what they're, how they're practicing, what they're working on, all these things. You get exposure to their experiences too. So the points I bring up, the relatable stuff, it should be relatable because I could see it didn't just affect me. So here's some relatable characteristics of cage fingering. The effort one has to make to stick to a fingering is both deliberate and strenuous. The fingering needs to be memorized as much as the notes need memorizing, with as much willpower and determination. You have to force yourself to remember what finger goes with what note. Drum it into you. If one isn't strict about it, one will always slip into a different fingering with every other repeat of a passage during practice. How often does the resolution, this time I'm going to stick to a fingering, come up? So, it's not easy to stick to a fingering. You have to make a deliberate effort to learn it. And when I was in the cage in Lilliput, how would I, when I get a new piece, what would happen is I'd be probably learning it hands separately, and then getting to know the notes. You begin that, and was a period when I was still in the cage and in Lilliput where it would just sound like notes. It wouldn't sound like a piece how it's meant to sound, and it would only be after a certain amount of time that it would start to resemble what it's meant to sound like, because I'm getting to know the notes. I don't know how long that could have taken. That might be a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It would depend. Before it was more structured when I was younger. Before I studied it in a third level situation, it would be, you get the homework from your lesson, and homework would be to practice it hands separately, and then the next week or the week after that the new homework would be to start practicing it hands together. So, and then when the hands together comes and you can sort of get through the piece, it's starting to resemble that. That's when I think, okay, now I need to start practicing properly. And And one of the things that would be happening would be for bits that are a bit difficult or feel like they're running away from me or a bit hard to kind of get the overview, the fingers I wouldn't always be using the same fingering every single time. So I might, it would differ. And so I think, there gets to a point where you have to do in the cage where you have to start breaking it up. You have to do the metronome work. You have to be sensible about the whole thing. And the whole idea of it is you do it exactly the same all the time, as often as possible, as many times as possible, so you can do it that way when the exam comes or whatever it is you need the piece for. So you always do it exactly the same. So one of the goals that one strives for is that one always uses the exact same fingering. And that takes an effort that's very difficult. That can be as hard to learn or to remember as the notes themselves. So that's one aspect of cage fingering. It's really hard to remember. And it takes real deliberate effort. It doesn't come naturally, the fingering. You have to deliberately do it, and you have to force yourself to stick to it. Because if you're not forcing yourself to stick to it, you'll always end up using different fingers. Why? Because cage fingering is completely wrong, and there'll always be an urge for your body to do what comes natural, to do the right thing, and you're forcing it to do something it doesn't want to do. So it's going to be disobedient. It's not going to go down without a fight. So you're constantly trying to hammer down your body, your fingers, into being submissive, into resigning and saying, right, I am now your captive. And it never works. You can't do it. It's impossible. So the next one is, one doesn't know if the fingering for the technically demanding parts of a piece that one has to commit to, that needs all that time to be learned, that needs all that discipline and restraint, will at the end of the day work and deliver success. So that will have happened to me as well, that there'll be a fingering often, when I was still going to lessons, the teacher would write it in, the fingering in sometimes. And I'd always wonder, and it didn't matter if the professor wrote it in or if I wrote it in, it made no difference. That there'd be a voice in the back of my head that doesn't know, will this fingering work? And that's because there was no insight employed when writing in the fingering, neither by me nor my professor. It was beautiful mind logic. The only criterion is essentially in the cage is, how do the fingers fit? So I don't run out of fingers. That's really the main concern of fingering in the cage, is how do the fingers fit so you don't run out of them? And then a little secondary thing, which is not really, won't be promoted or whatever, but the other thing is, how do I avoid using the weak fingers? How do I avoid using my little finger as much as possible? And of course, it's not like you never use your little finger, but there'll be places where you want to keep the little finger away, especially in technically difficult passages, in fast passages. You just want to try and stick to the strongest fingers as much as possible. And you'll see your teacher writing in the fingering, and you're not going to realize it because it'll be completely normal, because the way my teacher will have done it will be like how every teacher or professor does it. They'll say, yeah, you could put your thumb here and you could use 1, 2 and 3, and then you could cross the thumb under and maybe use 1, 2 and 3, 4. They'll be fitting the fingers in, but there's no insight being employed. You don't hear why this finger is used here and not the other finger. There'll be none of that, and you won't realize that's the case because it's completely normal. And it's like, Mr. Plinkett says on YouTube, you don't know it's happening, but your brain knows it's happening. So you don't realize there's no insight being employed, but deep down you do. You are aware on a subconscious level. You're aware that there was no insight used, there was nothing. And so the skepticism, the doubt is there. Will this fingering work? And given the amount of time it takes, the cage is full of something that's nothing exists in the cage, but there's cage stuff that exists in the cage. Something that exists in the cage is bad habits. The cage is rife, is plagued with bad habits, and everybody has bad habits in the cage. There's bad habits attached to past pieces. There's bad habits everywhere you go are bad habits. And a fingering that doesn't work will become a bad habit. And bad habits are impossible to break. They're in the cage. People will have pieces that they learned, in the past that they can't touch anymore, because every time they go to it, all those bad habits resurface. And in the cage, when you're longer in the cage, you might spend a long time not having played a piece, and you might think you go back to it, and it might be safe to go back to it because the bad habits will be gone now because such a long length of time has passed. And those people find out when they return to it that those same bad habits return, and then they really don't want to touch that piece anymore because they don't want to come in contact with those bad habits. They don't realize those bad habits exist in their playing constantly. It's just these pieces bring it to the fore. So, and given the amount of time and effort it takes to learn it, and you're getting into the habit of using the fingering, and then if it's wrong and you'll be wondering while you're learning it, how long will it take me to unlearn this fingering if it doesn't work? So you can never go through that process, that strenuous, difficult process of getting a fingering, learning a fingering, without that doubt and worry that what if it doesn't work, and what if this piece yet again becomes a whole new bunch of bad habits, and I'll have to unlearn it, and the exam will be coming closer, and I'll have to relearn fingering, and I'll, I think maybe you can understand what I'm saying. Like, for example, with no insight being used when your professor is writing in a fingering for you, how many times has your professor given you a fingering that keeps the thumb from a black key? I'll bet there's not a single person out there who has ever can remember their professor ever giving them a fingering where they said, yeah, and if you use your second finger here, it keeps the thumb away from the black key. They won't. They'll be just fitting the fingers in as they fit, and if the thumb happens to land on a black key, so be it. They'll do it. And the thing about that doubt and all, the cage can't imprison your instincts. They're your instincts. And instincts, the cage, they can't imprison them, or they can't eradicate your instincts. Your instincts are there. So everybody is experiencing that doubt in the cage. And what the cage can do is it can get you to ignore your instincts. And instincts generally aren't good in the sense that they are like an alarm going off. And instincts usually mean work for you. And so your instinct is telling you this isn't good, but acting on that instinct means you have to actually address it. It's much easier to go along with what your professor says. It's much easier to learn the fingering and live with that doubt than act upon it, because acting on the doubt means going in scary places that you have no idea what they're like, you have no answers for. And the instinct, it can serve two things. The instinct will come up when something is not good, and the instinct as well can come up when something is good. And the problem with the instinct when something is good is that instead of people understanding it as a glimpse of a bigger picture, they take that, like if it's a snapshot, what they do is they take that snapshot, and that'll be the snippets I said about, the innovations, the snippets. They'll take a little snapshot of something that works, and then they'll blow it up with fabrications and turn it into, they'll see they don't approach it with humility, so they'll see their chance of a career, and so they'll blow it up and they'll make something out of it that's just one big giant fabrication based on this little snippet of something that worked, and it'll be destroyed because they'll turn it into something it's not. But generally the instinct means work, and so it's not necessarily a nice thing to listen to, but the cage can't suppress your instinct. Then another relatable characteristic is, in the heat of the moment, when it counts, one will repeatedly find oneself involuntarily deviating from one's prescribed fingering, despite the long and arduous effort through endless repetition that was made to try and drum the fingering into the fingers and commit it to muscle memory. So it doesn't matter how often you've tried to do the same fingering every single time. When you're in the exam, you'll end up getting through, if you've gotten through it. If you don't get it wrong and then find out you've run out of fingers, if you manage to get through it without running out of fingers, you'll go out of that exam or performance or whatever it is you were doing, learning the piece for. You haven't done the fingering, you've been practicing that entire time. And there was somebody studying piano when I was studying it too, and what they did was to try and combat that, what they did, they wrote the fingering in the score for every single note before they even began learning it, so that when they practiced it and learned it, they never did anything except the same fingering every single time. And I'll bet it didn't work. And they as well will have ended up on the day using a different fingering. Another relatable characteristic is there is no continuity or cumulative effect. With each new piece, one has to figure out the fingering anew. There is no system. How can I fit the fingers in this time round? For every new piece comes new fingering patterns. The fingers are being fit in. There is nothing one knows that's consistent every time round. The question will be always, where can I cross the thumb under? How do the fingers fit? How do I not run out of fingers? Another one is, one never experiences the true effect or influence fingering has on one's playing or on interpretation because of all the above, because of the ineffectiveness of the wrong answer of cage fingering. You know, you're learning a fingering and sticking to it so you don't run out of fingers. It has nothing to do with interpretation. Or, you know, the effect or influence it has on playing. Like when you're, it's got nothing to do with achieving different levels of sophistication with your playing. It's just about how do I fit the fingers in so I don't run out of fingers and that I avoid using the weak fingers. I remember, you know, reading in, I think it might have been Harold C. Schoenberg's biography of Horowitz, if that was where I heard it, that Horowitz had said that he'd dream of fingering. That didn't make, I couldn't relate to that at the time, and I won't be the only one that can't relate to it. You know, the only one in the cage or in Lilliput that can't relate to it. Because I didn't know how you can dream of fingering, because I had no conception of how fingering, the influence fingering has on playing or on interpretation. You just don't. That's why, you know, the chapter on fingering or AC fingering, it won't mean anything to people because they don't know what the effect fingering can have, because in the cage fingering plays no role. Fingering is rather a nuisance in the cage. It rather makes life harder than makes life better. Fingering is not what improves your playing. Your brain being in control of your fingers improves your brain or improves your playing. You know, what your teacher tells you what to do improves your interpretation. The metronome improves your playing in the cage, is supposed to. Breaking things up into rhythms. All this stuff, slow practice, working the fingers with a loose wrist. That's what makes your playing better in the cage, not fingering. So, in the cage, since you never experienced the true effect or influence fingering has, fingering means nothing. Cage fingering is a cause of tension, stiffness and fatigue. Tension or stiffness can be eliminated through fingering and finger position, not through the metronome, not through slow practice, not through working the fingers, keeping the wrist loose. None of those things eliminate tension and fatigue. AC fingering, together with AC finger position, eliminates tension and stiffness and can eliminate fatigue to somewhere between, I'd say, 97 to 99%. And I mean that without having to compromise on speed, dynamic levels, expression, or fidelity to the score. The last 1% is eliminated through something else that, as well, does not exist in the cage, among the metronomes, or with their roll of honour. And AC fingering and AC finger position eliminates tension without the use of the metronome, without the need for constant repetition, without the need for strength building. Without any of those things, it eliminates it immediately. You can listen to any YouTube video or listen to any masterclass or any professor talk about tension, and they don't know the cause of tension. They don't know what causes tension. And so what they do is they give you means to, combat the tension itself. But to eliminate tension, one needs to eliminate what causes the tension. And what your roll of honor are doing, it's like if you imagine there's a leak in a pipe in your bathroom, let's say, and the water is spilling onto the tiles. What your roll of honor will be doing will be having you work on your mopping technique with the idea that if you get so good at mopping up, you'll be able to keep the floor dry all the time, because you'll be mopping it up as fast as the dripping is happening. AC fingering and AC finger position fixes the leak in the pipe, so there is no dripping anymore. That's that's the difference between what I'm doing and what the roll of honor does. So I only included relatable characteristics of cage fingering. The tension cage fingering causes would belong to the characteristics that I haven't included, because people in the cage, the roll of honor, your cage masters, wouldn't be able to relate to them. They wouldn't realize or know the connection, so they wouldn't recognize them as being characteristics of their cage fingering. They have all other kinds of excuses in their arsenal for them. They wouldn't know that fingering is related to tension, so you'll never see fingering being addressed. Not once. There will not be a single YouTube video, for example, out there that addresses the question of fingering when talking about how to reduce tension and all that crap. You can't reduce tension. You can either eliminate it or it's there. But you can't, you can't reduce it. So they have all other excuses for it. And those excuses will include a lack of strength in the fingers, or generally, or a lack of finger independence, poor rhythm, like you're rushing, or it's not even, that's causing tension, they'll think. And these are not the causes of tension, these are the symptoms of tension. No, they're not the symptoms, they're fabrications. Some are symptoms of tension, or symptoms of the cause. So, poor rhythm, hence the, all that metronome advice. Self-induced tension. So they'll say that you're causing the tension by you're playing with your wrist is too tight when you play. So they'll work on you pressing a key with a loose wrist, and that'll become the focus, and you'll be trying that, and then they'll instruct you to learn go through the piece, like let's say it's the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata, or I'd imagine the third movement of Das Leben Wohl would be a big tension, would be a difficult one, as when it comes to tension. I don't know. what they'll have you do is go through it where you do it slowly with the metronome and you work the fingers and make sure you keep the wrist completely loose as you do it. And then you do that ad nauseum. So self-induced tension will be another excuse as to what causes it. Not enough slow practice. Then they'll go on to the question of genetics or talent or rare gifts. You know, they'll think somebody like Horowitz or Kissin or Sokolov will have a different anatomy than everybody else. That's why they can do it. That some people are just blessed with whatever way their tendons or their muscles work, that they don't tense up like ordinary people, and so they're exceptional. There's something different. That's what they'll believe and spout. Or that you didn't start young enough. You know, they'll think the people who can play without tension are those that start at the age of 6, because when you're 6 or 5 or whatever, when you start, you have this approach to the piano that doesn't, you know, your muscles and your development adapts to the piano. So you develop in a way that means you don't tense up. I started the piano at the age of 11 and I have zero tension. I experience less tension in my playing than Kissin does. And Kissin can be admired or for how he can get through stuff without tensing. You know, people can consider that as being remarkable. But Kissin suffers more tension than I do. And I could show him how he could, especially in Beethoven, he could suffer less tension if he looks at AC fingering and AC finger position. He can improve his playing with this. So that, and I say that for, you know, when you think of yourself. And the cage activities, the roll of honor prescribe, or you're a professor, and this will happen with, you know, most ordinary places. What will happen is the cage activities they prescribe to reduce, you know, it's not just to combat tension. They'll be prescribing these. It is to achieve virtuosity and all. They will always come with a reason why they didn't work for them. So they will show you the exercises, the finger exercises you're meant to do, tell you about the time you're meant to spend on them, which means you'll have virtuosity and you'll have the dexterity afterwards, and then it'll come with a reason why it didn't work for them. And they'll say they weren't so into it, they weren't disciplined enough, or they loved teaching so much they rather concentrate on the teaching aspect, and they had no ambition to be a performer. I have no ambition to be a performer, but I'm a virtuoso. You will not hear from me any reason why it doesn't work for me, because it works for me. What I am sharing works for me, and it will work for you. And you know, there's not a single virtuoso out there that can top me. And that's the position you'll be in if but you'll always hear a reason why it didn't work for them. And you could as well. And that's how these people live in the cage. They convince themselves. What they're faced with is a continuous failure of the things they are prescribing, of those accepted methods. They constantly fail across the board. They're in the cage. They fool people, and that's why they'll say it. But nothing will have worked for them. It's like Czerny said, rules whose benefit I only learned to realise to their full extent at a much later date. Your roll of honour doesn't know how fingering relates to tension. It is no conception. Czerny says rules whose benefit I only learned to realise to their full extent at a much later date. Your cage professor, the roll of honour, the metronomes of Lilliput will never get to that point. What hope do you have under their influence or tutelage? In his book Die Kunst des Klavierspiels, Heinrich Neuhaus, in the supplements on fingering to his chapter 5 on page 149, displays his lack of insight when he talks about fingering used by Ignaz Friedman. This is what he writes about the fingering of Ignaz Friedman. And Heinrich Neuhaus, Richter, that Russian famous pianist, he went to Heinrich Neuhaus. He didn't learn how to play the piano from him. He was already Richter as he came, but he did go to him. And I think it was his way to, get a place for himself in the musical world, in a career. But that's kind of Heinrich Neuhaus's claim to fame. So Heinrich Neuhaus writes, als ich in Chopins Fis-Dur Nocturne, Opus 15, Nummer 2, folgenden, von Ignaz Friedman stammenden Fingersatz sah, überkam mich ein regelrechter pianistischer Widerwillen. Anstatt des natürlichen 4-5-4-3-2-1-2 setzt den Daumen auf H bei Chopin, wo doch jedes Kind versteht, dass der Daumen hier nur Berechtigung hätte, wenn diese Stelle beispielsweise so lautete. Man nimmt den Daumen doch nur zur Bewerkstelligung eines Lagenwechsels. Wo dieser aber unterbleibt und die Hand sofort wieder in die alte Lage zurückkehrt, ist die Verwendung des Daumens völlig sinnlos. Es ist mir unverständlich, wie ein so hochbegabter Pianist mit so reichen Erfahrungen als Interpret und Pädagoge wie Friedman solchen Unsinn verzapfen konnte. So, Neuhaus can't understand at all what Ignaz Friedman is doing there. And what Ignaz Friedman is doing there is he's using fingering as it relates to interpretation and expression. Neuhaus thinks the only reason you'd use the thumb is when you're changing position. So you can reach up to the octave, like he shows is the alternative reason. If that doesn't happen, using the thumb there is completely senseless. What Ignaz Friedman is doing, when he uses the thumb, he is sort of affecting a change in hand position. But what that means is, when he comes back to the A sharp with the fourth finger, he returns with the weight of the hand. And so he is using that change in the position to add the weight of the hand to the expression in his playing. And that A sharp is an appoggiatura. And so that appoggiatura will be played loud. And the Abzug is the G sharp following it. And instead of what what Neuhaus will have you do with his 4-5-4-3 is your brain is meant to tell the finger to add the expression. But what Neuhaus, or what Friedman is doing, is making it sort of foolproof. So the expression comes from the natural movements of your hand and your fingers, which makes it that you get it right all the time. Heinrich Neuhaus's, what he'd have you doing with that absent is, it'll end up bland. It won't be enough. It won't achieve the results. And Ignace Friedman is using fingering as it relates to interpretation. And Neuhaus has absolutely no concept of that whatsoever. So, yeah, fingering as it relates to expression and interpretation. Returning to the original position means the fourth finger comes with the weight of the hand. I employ the weight of the shift of the hand in a similar way to Friedman in the first movement of K457 from Mozart, at C minor sonata. And it's in that, in the transition towards the second subject, or whatever, the third subject. And I go from using the fifth finger to the thumb. So I go from the fifth finger to thumb, and with the thumb comes the weight of the hand. Again, I do it because it happens on a black key the next time round. I go from using the fourth finger to the second finger, the fourth to the second. And that's the thing with AC fingering. This is an example of how you can use AC fingering in whatever way you can imagine. And so I do that. And although it is not the only ticked box in my pro list for choosing that fingering, so I'll have a pro and con list. For every decision I make, I have a pro and con list. So I'll have multiple reasons, often multiple reasons, why I settle on a decision. That's what kills anybody in the Roll of Honor, because they'll see it's different than everybody else does it, and your Roll of Honor professor they only understand their job as to point out, flaws or what's not good enough in your playing. They do not realize that an infinitely more difficult and demanding part of their task is to spot those things that work. The only things that work that they spot are the things they tell you that are beautiful, because they don't want to address them, because they don't know what to do with them. So they'll tell you, oh, that's beautiful what you did, and you won't question it, because you'll be, you'll get that, you'll feel good, and you won't want to spoil that. But the only things they tell you that are beautiful are the things they don't want to have to address. You won't want to address them either, because you're so happy with the compliment. The most difficult thing of their job is to see when something is good. And they don't know that. They can't relate to that at all. And so what they do is they spend their entire careers just looking for things to criticize. And with me, because I'm completely unique, I do things nobody else does. So they have a field day with that. And they haven't got a clue. I am a test. I am a test for people. And many people fail. Most people fail. And if you don't fail, that is a testament to you. I say that and it might sound corny, but I know how many people fail. And when I encounter people that don't fail, I am impressed by them. And it is a quality that a person who doesn't fail when they encounter me, it would be something that they could keep in mind in terms of having faith in themselves, because it shows they are a quality person with great, promise. The people who fail, they are lost. Leave them in the cage. They're better off there. The only tragedy is they pull everybody into the cage with them. So it won't be the only criteria for me settling on that fingering that I do, but that is one that overlaps with Ignaz Friedman. It's the same idea, incorporating the weight of the hand into the interpretation and the expression. So the characteristics that I've said of cage fingering will never change or go away. It doesn't matter how many years go by and how you think you might have matured since the last time you tried to play a piece, any piece from beginning to end. It'll always devolve into soul-destroying, fruitless drudgery. At what point do you question your loyalty to those ideas when they persistently fail and let not just you but everybody down? When they never fulfill their promises? When you never see any of your students becoming virtuosos in the real sense of the world, of the word? If you have a long career behind you, you'll see waves of students come and go, and none of the stuff you've told them will have worked. And you will constantly see, by the end of the career, you will have noticed that all your students all had similar problems. And the conclusion you will be scared of or running away from them is that you're the source of those problems. You created those problems. It was what you told them that caused those problems. That'll be very unpleasant. Why would you want to stay loyal to those things that put such a bad taste on your career? Teachers with a conscience should be taking me seriously. If you're a teacher with a conscience, you should be taking me seriously, because you do not want to be telling your students things that put them in the cage, things that cause tension. You want to be eliminating tension for your students. And the best way to find out that my stuff is true is to try it for yourself, discover it for yourself, and become a virtuoso, and then show your students how to be virtuosos. The fact that you have to give them reasons why you're not a virtuoso is proof that you do not know how they can become virtuosos. You have to become a virtuoso yourself. You don't have to be a performer, but you do have to be a virtuoso. So you should be taking me seriously. You should not be dismissing me. You should be not hoping that I go away. You should not be ignoring me, and you should be promoting me, that other people here, and that Lilliput, the roll of honour, can't run away from this. And you'll be doing it for the sake of the people in the cage. Does anybody wonder, when they think of their fierce loyalty, at what point do those ideas do their job? What you'll be left with are things that are theoretically meant to work, together with a whole bunch of reasons why they don't work for you. That's the running team with everybody. Things that are theoretically meant to work, together with all the reasons why they didn't work for you, but why they will work for the next person that comes along. If it all depends on the person, and that person has yet to be born. You'll always, I think, I'll bet something that's very common in music, in conservatories and music schools and stuff, will be the hope that's in young people. They'll say, oh, we have a very promising group of kids now. And there's all the enthusiasm for the young kids who are beginning. And then when the teenagers, there's no enthusiasm for them in the schools, because the teenagers have already been corrupted by the instruction they're gotten. And all the faculty, all the teachers in those music schools, they'll be thinking that what they need is a talent to come along that they can improve. And they don't realize that every talent that comes along, they destroy, and they turn them into a mundane and average, unremarkable pianist with all the problems that all the other teenager pianists have, because they have no conception that they're the ones doing it to them, that it is their, if they think they could get a Mozart and they could tell the Mozart the things they know, and what they'd get as a result is a Mozart that knows the things they know, but they wouldn't. There'd be no Mozart. They'd destroy the Mozart telling them the things they know, because the things they know put Mozart in the cage, and they have no conception of that. In paragraph 84, Bach describes today's roll of honour and their modern ideas regarding fingering. He implies that already then they were old-fashioned, and he describes the damage from which their victims still suffer to this day. Here's paragraph 84 from the chapter on fingering. Da wir aus allen bisher angeführten ersehen haben, dass vor allen anderen Fingern besonders der rechte Gebrauch des Daumens sowohl in den gehenden als springenden, sowohl in den einstimmigen als mehrstimmigen Gedanken von besonderer Erheblichkeit sei, so ist der Schade so viel größer, denn einige, und zwar in unseren jetzigen Tagen, auswärts herausgekommenen Anweisungen zum Klavierspielen, außer anderen falschen Sätzen, besonders wegen dieses Punktes, anrichten. So what you're hearing there is Bach is incredulous. He can't believe that today, in 1753, despite how far we've come, that there's still these things coming out. He thinks that would fit to, 50 years ago, where the people knew nothing. But he can't believe that in 1753, there'll be people coming out with the ideas. And he's talking about the damage they do. If you suffer tension, if you suffer, if you have a problem with evenness in your playing, all these things, that is the schaden that the instruction you're getting is doing. And it doesn't matter if you're going to an official school or whatever. They are responsible for that. So, einer lässt den Gebrauch des Daumens gar weg. This won't be so relevant anymore, because that's not the case nowadays. That's over. And that's the one that the Roll of Honor will think of when they're touting their innovations, when their arrogance leads them to believe that they're so advanced. But the other one that Bach talks about now, ein anderer geht desto unfreundlicher mit seinen Schülern So this one now, which is the Roll of Honor today, they are less friendly with their students than the ones who tell their students to leave the thumb away entirely. So Bach is saying the Roll of Honor today are worse. The second group he's describing now are worse than the first group, meaning more backward than those telling their students to keep the thumb away entirely. So ein anderer geht desto unfreundlicher mit seinen Schülern erfordert nicht allein von ihnen, dass sie alle Finger ohne Unterschied und ohne die gehörige Ordnung auf allen Tasten herumklettern lassen. Sie sollen sogar dieses auf einer Taste allein tun können. So I'd say that could be, they'll have an exercise where you're meant to play play a key with all the fingers. Ones which there'll be plenty in the Roll of Honor demanding that of their students, and they'll think it's a clever exercise, and the students will think, wow, this must be, the inside tip that puts me ahead of the rest. So der erste sieht Schüler, welche nicht anders als durch Stolpern, Absetz und Verschränkung der Finger fortkommen. Des anderen Scholaren werden ohne Not und Nutzen strapaziert. Besonders muss bei ihnen alle Augenblick die Hand verstellt und verzogen werden, indem sie sogar in den Tonarten mit den meisten Versetzungszeichen, ohne die geringste Not, den Daumen auf die halbe Töne schleppen. Durch dieses Verdrehen kommen die anderen Finger aus ihrer natürlichen Stellung. Sie können nicht anders als durch Zwang gebraucht werden. Folglich fehlt alle Gelassenheit, alle Schlappigkeit der Nerven weg und die Finger werden steif. This is a direct commentary from Bach on false innovations in fingering, attributed mainly to Chopin and then to modern piano by Lilliput's Roll of Honour. With it, Bach is describing the cage. He is describing the metronomes of Lilliput and their Roll of Honour's relationship to Opus 10 number 4. The use of all fingers on all keys. The second group in the Roll of Honour of Bach's time would have fingered Opus 10 number 4 the exact same way as our Roll of Honour finger it today, giving the exact same reasoning for their fingering. The constant changing of the position of the hand, without the slightest necessity. I prove how unnecessary it is with my performance of it. Bach describes the exhaustion, the tension and stiffness. AC fingering reduces the adjustment of the hand to a minimum. You know, Bach talks about how the fingers are taken out of their natural positions and how the players, the schüler, the student will be overly taxed. AC fingering reduces the adjustment of the hand to a minimum. One can notice how stationary my hand is in Opus 10 number 4 compared to the speed of my fingers when using AC fingering and AC finger position. This is a point to fingering as it relates to virtuosity that no one in the Roll of Honour knows. They have half-baked ideas when it comes to hand position. There's one that'll talk about, like the bridge of the hand and how strong that is and how you're meant to maintain that. And some will talk about like you're holding a tennis ball and stuff, and the focus will all be on the hand when it's stationary on the keyboard and getting this position, and the entire time is spent on that. It's so absurd. I can't even say it without, I saw one doing these things and they had the student there in the masterclass with their hand on the keyboard. And the guy said, I'd love to leave it at that because that's perfect. Yes, it is perfect because that's as far as it goes. And so he wanted to, without the student playing a single note, never mind playing a piece through from beginning to end. They wanted to leave it there because that's all it is. And as soon as the music, as soon as this pieces start, it all goes, it's all gone because it doesn't. It's if you knew what I knew, if you could see it the way I see it, you'd understand my frustration, and you as well. You would see beyond their you know the facade or the show, the spiel, and you'd see it for what it is, and it's pathetic. The more stationary the hand remains, the faster the fingers will travel. Every movement of the hand takes from the movement of the fingers. You can see how stationary my hand is. And then look at the speed of the fingers. And don't think that the speed of the fingers translates into, you know, playing the music at a faster tempo. The speed of the fingers happens between the notes, because the notes are held for their proper length, and the speed happens between the fingers. So you have to watch out the fingers. And so I'll put up a bit of the first ballade, the chord playing. I'll put it up in that middle section. You know, there's that theme that comes back 3 times. The first is with a voice, you know, a bass voice and a soprano voice, and then the second is in chords. And I'll put that up, and I'll put the coda chords up as well, and you can see how stationary my hand remains. And then look at the speed of the fingers. This is the sort of speed AC fingering and AC finger position delivers. Everyone benefits from a solution. Shifting the hand left and right along the keyboard does not mean changing the hand position. The hand position changes when one schleps the thumb and little finger onto a black key, which should be kept to a minimum. When you are constantly doing that, you are literally all over the place when you play. And every movement of the hand takes from the movement of the fingers. You don't have to believe that I'm saying that. I know the results, the effects of what it is I'm sharing. the rest is me guessing or speculating, because I don't have the answer as to why it works, or those, so yeah. And one could think from looking at it that I keep my hand forcefully in place or in a stationary position, but that would be a completely incorrect observation. It is stationary because through AC fingering and AC finger position, it has no need to move. If you're teaching AC fingering and AC finger position to a student, you should not be telling them to keep the hand position in place. This is just, I'm saying this so you can notice the elements, so you can start to realize what it is, what opportunity is being presented to you. You should not be keeping the hand position still, should not be something that you should be drawing the student's attention to if you're teaching that, because that happens all by itself. And if you draw the student's attention to that, you'll be wasting the resources on something that's completely unnecessary. I do not keep my hand in position deliberately. That happens all by itself. That is because AC fingering and AC finger position is the solution. So how stationary my hand position is can also be observed in the runs in the first ballade. Basically, you can see it in all the pieces I upload. And that'll give the impression that, the virtuosity that you are witnessing in those videos, some of it's so great that if you're not paying attention to it, you don't even notice that it's happening. But the more you pay attention to it, the more amazed you'll be at the results. And I present that as a demonstration of what there's to be gained from what I'm sharing. I could return to Neuhaus and his book regarding all fingers on all keys, because he belongs to the second group Bach describes in paragraph 84. Here is an example of how he fingers the C minor prelude from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So the second prelude and fugue, I think, from the Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier in C minor. And you can see he's putting the thumb on the E flat, just like that second group who have all fingers and all keys without any ordinal. And he justifies that. Basically, he says with that there'll be a schwunghaftere Bewegungen. So he's saying schwunghaftere is like Schwung is a swing, so it's more, I don't know, flourished or lilting, or like it's more, there's more of a momentum in it. What he's talk so what Bach talks about is the fingers being taken, ripped out of their natural position, about the poor students being overly taxed. Neuhaus frames it like, like it's a good thing. Like you'll have more, a livelier movement. And he say there's less stretching. In 1753, Bach can't believe that there's people like Neuhaus still around. Here's paragraph 4 from the chapter on fingering. Da man hieraus erkennen kann, dass der rechte Gebrauch der Finger einen unzertrennlichen Zusammenhang mit der ganzen Spielart hat, so verliert man bei einer unrichtigen Fingersetzung mehr als man durch alle mögliche Kunst und guten Geschmack ersetzen kann. And just with Neuhaus and his thumb on the E flat in that book 1, and how he says it leads to more, kind of, I don't know the word schwunghaftere Bewegungen. It's movements that are more like bigger movements, or there's a more of a swing to them. That's it. There's movements with a more string to them, and there's less stretching. That's how Neuhaus frames that. Putting the thumb, schlepping the thumb onto the black key. And here's how Bach frames it. Des anderen Scholaren werden ohne Not und Nutzen strapaziert. Besonders muss bei ihnen alle Augenblick die Hand verstellt und verzogen werden, indem sie sogar in den Tonarten mit den meisten Versetzungszeichen, ohne die geringste Not, den Daumen auf die halben Töne schleppen. Durch dieses Verdrehen kommen die anderen Finger aus ihrer natürlichen Stellung. Sie können anders nicht als durch Zwang gebraucht werden. Folglich fällt alle Gelassenheit, alle Schlappigkeit der Nerven weg und die Finger werden steif. So Bach says with an incorrect fingering, you lose more than all possible art and good taste can replace. The bad news in the cage is the fingering is wrong, and art and good taste don't exist in the cage. So in the cage, those in the cage are well and truly screwed. I am providing a way out of the cage, out of Lilliput. That's why I say those things. You can ignore this because it's unpleasant. I acknowledge that it is unpleasant. And you might think I'm a very negative person, but I'm not, because I am providing the solution. There is nothing more positive that one can do than provide the solution, than providing the correct answer. Neuhaus, his claim to fame was that, like I said, Richter went to him. Richter said at the end of his documentary that he doesn't like himself. That is because Richter never escaped the cage. He never entered the world of music. Richter was a treffer, a fast player from profession, one who hits all the right notes. He had no joy in his playing. If he'd entered the world of music, if he would have followed, if he had been under my influence, he would not have been saying he doesn't like himself. He didn't like himself because he was in the cage. He got no joy from what he had to do. And it was remarkable what he achieved, because he was doing it all in the cage, all working on all that. And what you'll hear in, you know, his recordings of the Opus 10 number 4 and like the Revolutionary Etude will be famous, but they're flat. They don't have the roundness that mine do. They're not as fast as mine. They're, you know, he won't get anything. He didn't get anything out of that. And he says it. He says he doesn't like himself. That is because he was in the cage. And look at where he got in the cage, and it didn't help. It didn't matter. You don't have to believe me that that's the case. But he said it. I can understand. He, you know, music provides nourishment for the soul. Notes, the virtuosity that Richter represented, sets the face in wonder, but gives the soul nothing to do. The same will go for him. He had to sit at that piano, playing like he played. He had to endure that all the time. And his soul is famished, it's malnourished, it gets nothing. What you are seeing in that documentary when Richter says he doesn't like himself is somebody who has an empty soul. And that's the thing with the cage. You'll think, what's he talking about? You're talking about successful people. There's victims. There's a hierarchy in the cage, and the cage masters, the people who pull you into the cage, they'll make some of you useful for them. To continue their work, to get the positions. But for yourself and your own joy, you're useless. And Richter is the perfect example of that. I am Bach's successor when it comes to fingering. I did with the little finger what Bach did with the thumb. And all the discrepancies I pointed out while covering the chapter on fingering were remedied by AC fingering. Bach does not normally have discrepancies despite what Bärenreiter might say, or all those others regarding the Pralltrill scam. Bach did not have discrepancies. The discrepancies existed because he hadn't, or his father hadn't fully solved fingering. And what was remarkable, what has my utmost admiration for him, is that on the one hand, the stuff he got right. And the stuff that wasn't right, he didn't push. And he allowed those discrepancies to exist. Like if you imagine the right answer as going along a path, and he got to a point in the path and there was various, it went off the way it should have been going. He never sort of pushed through that way. He always stopped at where it didn't work, and he never rejected any glimpses of the path ahead. He allowed them as exceptions to exist. He didn't think of himself, how he'd look if there was anything to contradict them. He embraced what was correct, what was true, and he didn't elevate any false gods. And that that is kind of remarkable that he was able to do that. If you're someone who likes nothing better than a good fingering, you won't get better than the one bearing my initials. Oh, but the AC as well, aside from it being the initials, my initials, it as well alludes to the 1, 3, 5 and 2, 4 skip a finger aspect of the solution. So the two groups, you know, like the 2 and 4 or the 1, 3 and 5, it's like it's going from A to C, it's skipping B. So those are the two groups. And there's that skip a finger aspect of the solution to fingering. And so the AC is referring to them. It's skipping B, it's going from A to C. And the beautiful mind logic is all about ABC. That's why the solution to fingering remained hidden till now. And I don't know how advanced everybody needs to be till it's recognized, the solution to fingering. I don't think we're much different than the time of Galileo, where, you know, when Galileo said objects of a different size don't fall at different speeds, everybody laughed at him. Everybody thought, yeah, right, whatever you say. Okay, I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll pick up where I left off in the next video. Thanks. Bye.